and it was very, very successful. As a matter of fact, well near 300 of the 2500 series cars would be built, round figures, and a considerable amount here of the 2900 series. Now, as we said, the 2900 series car was produced in much larger quantity than the 2500 series cars, 2501s, 2s, and so on. As a matter of fact, there was only 236 made of the 25 seat buses. Not quite 600, about 590, 567 of them were made, with the largest being made in the 2903 series. Remember, the bus stretched from 2901 through 2904. Yes, there was even a 2904. For many bus fans, this was one of the most adorable little GMs that ever existed. It has a real soft spot in the hearts of many bus fans. The 2904, she would differ from her little sister here, the 2903, mostly by the use of some engineering that you couldn't see. She had a set of wings in the front and a quasi-silver side strip down the side. She would last also up until about 1951, I think, there was the end of no, 1949 was the end. 1949. She'll be produced through 1949. Now, meanwhile, back in the transit coach department, now remember, the flat windshield was gone now. Now we are now into 1941, and they're building in aluminum, completely monocoque coaches. Coast to coast, they were a runaway bestseller. I mean, everybody was buying these cars. They were built like bridges. Greyhound was on board big time, of course, in the operations where they had transit and suburban coaches, because the car was built not only as a transit bus, but it was built as a suburban as well. Again, the creation of TD, Transit Diesel, would come about, and Transit Diesel 3605 would mean this is a 36-seat bus, 5th series. And while the 3600 series car was unquestionably the one that was sold in the most quantity, they were already experimenting with big buses. As a matter of fact, here is an experimental one-off working on 5th Avenue, and she was known as the TDH. Now the H standing for hydraulic. Now they added Transit Diesel Hydraulic, hydraulic being automatic transmission style. And she would be the 5502. Again, it was just an experiment though, and it was 43 feet long, believe it or not. Thus the assembly line at Pontiac would reflect the immediate success of this coach. The war would, of course, interfere with coach production heavily. A limited amount of buses would be manufactured during the war. Here is one by transportation bus historian Bob Burrows out in Nevada, of a Pacific Greyhound wartime delivered transit car. They were delivered only in all battleship gray back in those days. But the success of the car was assured. It was obvious that that was going to be the killer. No question of that. She was going to be the winner. Now, meantime, back in the inner city department. Remember that little 2900 series bus? Thus, the PGA 3301 was born. Again, a flat windshield. So the success of the 2900 series little sister was brought over to this, and then plus she was upsized from a 33 to a 3700 series car. The windshield was sunk. Now these girls I rode, the Trailways of New England 3700 series. These are 3702s. Now they only had the 471 series diesel in them. And while they were on the flat and level, they could move along with traffic pretty good. My word, when they saw a hill, they just up and died. I mean, I want to tell you, they up and died big time. But I do remember these Trailways of New England cars vividly, just as if it was yesterday. Now here's a 3703. See the wings on it and the piece of chrome down the side, the imitation silver siding? Now this is what she would evolve into after the war. Like her little sister of the 2900 series, they would put, first they started out with this, just on some of the 3702, just a little chrome wing up there. But then it would become very substantial. A huge chrome wing and a big silver side strip down the side. She would be produced in great quantity at the close of the war when everybody was just starving for equipment, because during the war they ran the wheels off of equipment. And again, for many operators, she would become first line equipment, first diesel equipment, that they purchased. Because the bus companies, the big major bus companies trying to hold down schedules, did not particularly enjoy that four-cylinder back there. But it was pretty darn tough to be able to go anywhere and not bump into a 3700 series car. This beautiful 3704 of Aerolines in Connecticut. Up in my neck of the world where I grew up, I got to ride them on Boston and Maine, on Trailways of New England, and Plymouth and Brockton had some too. Boston and Maine cars were very, very pretty. Flying Eagle Whiteway lines, which I used to bump into from time to time in Dixie Terminal. They ran up to Danbury in Connecticut. Was a long-time favorite of mine. With the very, very successful 671, much, much more powerful, bigger engine than was in the 3702s and 3s, the 471. A logical thing would to make the car bigger and more powerful. Thus the 4101 was built. Judged by many to be, again, one of the super classics that GM ever engineered and put out. Of course, this was now the close of the war, and the car was being produced in 1948, so she was a little bit late. She had the IC41 Brill had a head start on it and was doing very, very well. Here's Public Service in New Jersey. That's only 335 4101s would ever be built. Now, consequently, 335 buses, Prevost or MCI would give their right foot for an order of 335 buses. But by now, GM's overhead and union contracts were so horrendous that, well, 335 wasn't much of anything. But despite that, that is not what killed the 4101 in reality. It was mainly the 3700 series car. Remember the 3703 that they put the wings on and gussied up the side with a little silver siding. Well, a 3704 was an entirely new bus. Unbelievably new. Now the 3704, while it looked radical from the front, still had the same identical camelback in the rear, believe it or not. Other than the fact, of course, that if you saw it from the rear, well, that's a dead giveaway. You could look for this hump up in the roof. The breather up there, ventilator. The silver siding didn't carry around the rear either because she had that camelback. Remember, you couldn't carry that silver siding around that camelback. A very difficult task. Thus, as quickly as the pretty 4101 was born, she was dated and lived a not very long death. I mean, not very much a long life. Doesn't sound like I'm going to have one either. But now the 3704 would change into the 4102 and the 4103. Available with partial silver siding, full silver siding, no silver siding. It was an immensely successful little bus. The sales were brisk, including the mighty Greyhound. Greyhound bought this car in quantity as well. MK&O Trailways. MK&O didn't have a terribly long stint in the Trailways family. The folks that ran MK&O didn't get on very well, I guess, with that Trailways board. Little Badger coaches, which is alive and well today. Milwaukee Madison. For me, there's a special soft spot in my heart for the 4103 because I had one. I owned one. It's called the Red Ghost. Matter of fact, in, let's see, Bussin' Round 2, there is almost a feature-length film on the creation, the finding, creation, and adventures of this car. I mean, I want to tell you, this car did some roaming. While she started out looking like American bus lines, she ended up looking like this. Peter Pan lines. She is alive and well today. Matter of fact, you will see her in the latest Bussin' Round at the Bus Bash in Springfield, in Fairhaven, Massachusetts. She came down. Dennis Lyons, IBC or Dennis Lyons owns her now, and he brought it down to the Bus Bash. 1,501 4103s would be made, with the last 9 being made in 1953, because they were cooking up something new again in the inner city design department. But meanwhile, back the transit coaches were offered in all sizes, and they were absolutely unbelievably successful. Little by little, they were whittling away at Mack, White, twin coach. In '46, the thermomatic heating and ventilating systems were introduced. That's where you started to see that little air scoop up over the destination sign. Now, the pre-wars, prior to that, as you can see, the air ventilation system was on the side of the coach, on the roof up there. But it was obvious to all that this would be the dominating sales coach in the post-war era. It would forever change the face of the transit industries. 1948, they rounded the windows and spiffied her up a tad bit. Basically pretty much the same car. These I used to ride from Lynn to Winthrop, Massachusetts, when I lived in Lynn. It's marked up Plymouth, but service bus line served, was home based in Revere, Mass, and their cars didn't see Plymouth unless they were sent down there for a reason. Again, more and more huge, giant driveaways. 1953 saw an extraordinary breakthrough in the addition of air ride suspension. No longer were there metal leaf springs, there were big donut airbags. She was increased to 40 feet, and the Suburbans had a newly revised big side passenger window that went along too. They were very pretty cars. The city transit systems as well went to 40 feet. This is a TDH 5105 of Seattle. The 40-foot buses were here to stay, that was for sure. 35-foot coaches were still available. Not everything went to 40 feet to stay at 40 feet. You could still buy 33-foot cars, as a matter of fact. Like this old Bridgeport Auto Transit, where I used to live in Bridgeport. These little fellas. This is Newport, Rhode Island. And again, I think these are actually 28, not even 33. I wouldn't want to stake my life on that one. They look like 28s, but they may be 33s. However, the boys at GM are always thinking, as successful as this car was, and even more successful in the 40-foot 5108 version of the Camp Bus of New Jersey, they're always changing. And thus, the mighty Fishbowl, as we know it, or back in those days, the new look, was born. In reality, it was September of '59. The very first ones that were ever delivered were delivered to DC Transit. Again, every type, size, and description under the sun was available. You name it, you could have had it. From 33s right on up to 40s. However, before we get too far into the Suburbans and the Transits of the new look, we got to go back a couple of years here because something else was happening. I suppose you could call it the most famous bus of all time. Now, at the close of the war, Greyhound was experimenting with new designs, new concepts. They had more money than half the nations on Earth. They made so much money during World War II. This car was introduced. It was called the Highway Traveler. It was only one ever built. It never went anywhere. Its luggage space was almost non-existent. They were just daydreaming, pie in the sky. The car actually saw a little bit of experimental line service. Because in these days, Greyhound was based in Chicago. And she would stay in Chicago essentially as a toy until she was actually sold to Houseman, who scrapped it, burnt it, junked it. However, they remembered the old deck-and-a-half ACF Brills of the 1921, 22, 23 period in history and decided to adapt that deck-and-a-half style to a then modern bus. This is in the early 50s. This one-off prototype was built. She was a beautiful car. Actually, you can see rolling footage of this coach in Bussin' Round #1, which in itself has a chapter which is almost a complete Greyhound history. This very beautiful one-off coach would be sold off, spend her life with a couple of entertainers groups until she finally ended up in a Nashville junkyard and was parted out. There would, however, be a successor. A coach would be built as a result of the experimentation with the GX2 original Scenicruiser, and this was her. This is how she was scotch lit at night. On the bottom level was the lavatory, a couple of stairs up to the upper level. The first ones were delivered with two 471 engines. It was a horror show. The GM engineers could never make those things work right. Greyhound got ripped, ended up suing them, and they all ended up with 871 series engines. The new then 8-cylinder diesel. The thing about it was it had humongous baggage bays. Really great. Not only could you carry a gazillion bags, but you had access to freight. I don't think I can ever recall meeting a bus driver who drove these cars and wasn't absolutely unequivocally in love with them. They would serve Greyhound very well through the years. As a matter of fact, the high 70s before the last one left Greyhound service. Oh, no, I mean, I cannot begin to tell you how many people love this car. I have no idea or concept of people that are in the outside world that aren't even bus fans that love this car. You ask anybody, what's a Greyhound bus look like? They said, well, one time they were beautiful. They had this upper and lower deck and everything. In reality, the car was an illusion. It really wasn't that much higher than a bus you'll be seeing momentarily. As we said, they lasted well into the 70s, were converted primarily into combo cars, the upper level of the coach being a freight compartment. One is still preserved in the Greyhound fleet today. But a lot of the components on this coach were a result of this bus. The incredible 4104. I mean, did they have a winner here? Oh, absolutely an impact bus. Well over 5,000 4104s will be built through the years. Now again, see, here is the illusion. Now that's a 4104, and you know they're not that awfully high, and by today's standards, they're very low buses. Look at the Scenicruiser. Scenicruiser is probably less high than today's present Prevost H340. Once again, however, before we get into the 4104, the Scenicruiser was exclusively a Greyhound design and you couldn't buy it. This time they wouldn't even give it to the people who interlined with them. This was exclusively their car. Thus the 4901 was built, which essentially was a 4104. Those growth glands went wacky. They raised it up to it's a high level car. The whole floor now is the same level as the upper deck of a Scenicruiser. Try as they may, they could not get a sufficient amount of orders. Now, M.E. Moore of Continental Trailways wanted to buy the car in a fairly substantial number. But they said, nah, if Greyhound doesn't want to get in on the thing, we're going to kill the program. M.E. Moore was so incensed, that's what sent him abroad to buy Eagles or to search out another bus manufacturer other than GM. But again, they did sell the 4104. Humongous quantities. Unheard of. But you see, what happened is that with those elongated picture windows, they dated your bus fleet. Everybody could look at your buses. People who didn't even know buses could look at them and say, oh God, you got old buses here, don't you? Now here's a rare 4104. This is Korean Greyhound lines. As we said, they were everywhere. Everywhere you turned around to look. Post road stages out of Connecticut is shown here. Now there's no question that this is only up to 1954. The 4104 would evolve into the 4106, the 4106, into the 4107, and the 4107 would be the last 35-foot inner-city coach built, into the 4900 series cars. Now, we are not glossing lightly over these at the moment for a particular reason. There is going to be a tape B, a second tape on the history of GM that's in the works right now, which is going to deal very heavily from the 1953 era onward. There's just not enough space in this one unit. There is GM of Canada. GM in Canada, based in London, Ontario, began construction in April of 1963. And the plant was actually turning out buses by 1961, December. So there's that to be covered. Including the Canadian articulated classics. There'll be a